Okay, colleagues, good morning, and I hope we're live. Hope everyone is staying safe. I had a bit of free time on my hands, so I thought I'd do a short video, basically thinking out loud a little bit on the question that has been, well, it has been bothering me recently, but this question has also been with me for a very long time now, right? And this is the question of the relationship between the ideas of Buddhism and Marxism. Now, to be clear, so these are two very important systems of thought, which are important for me and for the past, well, at least for the past 10 years, actually more. These were probably the two most important systems of thought for me in my own head. And a lot potentially to discuss here, but I thought, sometimes saying things out loud helps me structure my thoughts. And I've actually had some preliminary conversations with students, which led me to some thoughts down the line. So before we begin, disclaimer, and this is kind of an issue that maybe we'll be able to even discuss. And the problem is that there's no such thing as there's no single Buddhism, and there's no single Marxism, right? So these systems of thought are evolving, and Buddha maybe changed his mind, maybe, possibly. Some schools of Buddhism believe that. Marx definitely changed his mind. And then, of course, you have the question of later tradition, and to what extent is it a interpretation, misinterpretation, and the same thing goes with Marx. So this is a huge problematic issue that we need to have at the back of our head. I don't want to focus on this too much because this is like a whole separate discussion. Maybe we'll do it someday. Who knows? Should I comment on this? I wonder. So yeah, I suppose one thing that's going to be interesting is that for both Marx and Buddha, a very important idea is basically the notion of illusion somehow, right? So Marx talks about ideology, and the Buddhists talk about the veil of Maya, right? So both talk about how there's a certain tendency of human thought to not perceive the reality in the correct or straightforward fashion. So the mind has a tendency to misperceive things. The mind has a tendency to misperceive and misconstrue things, misinterpret, misunderstand. Let me write misperceive the reality. The reality, whatever the reality may be. And so the reason I bring this up here at the very beginning is that if, as one of the core doctrines, you postulate the capacity of humans, I don't want to say the capacity, the tendency of human mind to misperceive reality, then an immediate question to ask is, does this tendency work vis-a-vis the Buddhism and the Buddhist tradition and vis-a-vis the Marxist tradition? Could it be that portions or the entire, right, so portions of later tradition, so let's say elements of later tradition, whatever you may want to call that, are due to such misperceptions, are due to this tendency, this misinterpretative tendency, right? I think that's a word in English. Anyway, or I mean, of course, you could go deeper and you could say, well, if our mind is motivated to misperceive reality, maybe Buddha himself or Marx himself, right, were guilty of this, right, to some extent, to some extent. Let's not use the word guilty. That's strong and judgmental. Let's use the word susceptible. Susceptible. And I think that, well, it's harder to talk about Buddha, but I think in case of Marx, it's easier. To see, there are complicated issues. I think that there are certain passages in Marx one can point to when Marx's emotions are getting the better of him. Partly, this is not entirely limited to this particular problem, but of course there's a very famous issue of analytical versus humanistic Marxism, right? And one could legitimately, I think, see humanistic elements of Marxism as opposed to structural or scientific Marxism, right? As Marx giving in to emotions, right? So again, whole separate discussion. Curious students, make a note, ask me later. We'll talk about this sometime. Actually, the idea of ideology is, the concept of ideology is super important. I should do another video, and I will, because, well, anyway, I don't want to spoil that, but it's coming. It's coming shortly, because this is maybe the most important idea in Marx. In fact, in many ways, I think that this notion, right, that we misperceive reality, this has always been at the root of my own personal philosophical interest. So, again, let me just do a brief digression. But so basically, you know, critical theory, right? So this issue that maybe we are misperceiving reality. So misperception, misconstrual, misunderstanding, right? Not just accidental, but systematic, right? Right? Systematic tendency to misperceive, misconstrue, misunderstand reality. And there's a bunch of philosophers whom I've been interested in precisely for this reason. So there's Descartes. You could start with Socrates, but Socrates is complicated. Let's not go to Socrates. So there's Descartes, obviously, with his malicious demon argument. To me, has always been David Hume. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, very importantly. Rousseau, again, has this notion that society has a deleterious effect, detrimental, negative effect on human on human nature, on the development of human psyche. In this sense, I think Rousseau is a very important anticipator of Freud and Nietzsche, right? Or I should say Nietzsche and Freud, right? This notion that somehow sociality, and even before sociality, even linguisticality, Sprachlichkeit, breaks us. That to be linguistic, to not just live your life, but also describe your life in a certain way in language, that's already a misperception, that's already a misconstrual. The Buddhists would probably be very sympathetic to this thought. So Descartes, Hume, Rousseau, and of course, I want to, you know, the subjects of our discussion today, Marx and, you know, Buddha, somewhere on the center, on the, I don't like, on to the side, because I have been formally trained. I have begun my formal training in history, Western philosophy, and Buddhism. Kind of, I was interested in that, but there was like a separate interest in many ways. And I've always, because like I think, you know, a dialogue between Hume, Marx, and Rousseau in my head is fairly straightforward. I see them seated at the table, whereas Buddha was always a little bit to the side, and it was unclear what should Marx say about Buddha, what should Buddha say about Marx. To me, I mean, I hope it's clearer to me now, and this is the reason I'm recording this video, and I'm hopefully going to get to this in a second. But this is the basic notion again. So, and the reason I draw our attention to this, right? So that to me, doing philosophy was to a very large extent synonymous with taking a critical stance towards our own thinking, and starting with an idea, with a notion, with a possibility, right, that our mind can systematically misrepresent reality to us, that we may be mistaken about the external world. And for this reason, again, Marx's notion of ideology was super important to me from the very beginning. This is basically, communism, I feel that a lot of people are suspicious of the ideas of communism for various reasons, some of them good, some of them not so good, but clearly, right, there is something problematic, and maybe like you can ask this question, you know, when is communism going to happen? Is it really going to be this perfect society? Is it going to solve all my problems? So like, you know, it's like, I think it's harder to buy into the notion of communism, right, of Marx's positive project, than to take his criticism of capitalism. Incidentally, I'm not sure if I should even maybe add this to the slide. So let's add this parenthetically. Marx was mostly interested in criticizing capitalism. So he was an analyst and a critic of capitalism. He was also, I want to say, I'm not sure what the right word is, promoter or a poet. Like, he certainly recognized important, you know, with important positive role of capitalism, right? In fact, indispensable positive role of capitalism. You cannot have communism without capitalism for Marx, right? But still, so I want to say that for me, Marx, first and foremost, was a critical theorist. I was mostly on board with Marx's negative project of criticism of understanding, neutral project of understanding capitalism, and critical project of criticizing, negative project of criticizing capitalism. And I was always less interested in this positive project of, what could come, what could lie beyond capitalism. Not to mention, there's this important self-referential problem that if we understand that there's this ideological tendency of the human mind to misperceive reality, well, how do we know that, that communism isn't just another ideology, right? So I want to say that criticism of ideology in Marx has a certain tendency to undermine our faith or our optimism about the prospects of communism in reality. And that's an important thing. So let's say, again, so Marx as a critic of ideology undermines our optimism about communist prospects, or should undermine, I think, rightfully so. Now, so I want to get to the dialogue with Buddhism, but actually, I feel that maybe something similar could be going on with Buddhism as well, right? So again, I'm on a more shaky ground here, but so again, when I talk about the Buddha, of course, the Buddha is a title. Saying that Siddhartha Gautama was a Buddha is a statement of faith, like to say that Jesus of Nazareth was Christ, right? So it's like I understand that this is a judgmental and loaded term, Buddha. Of course, when I talk about Buddha, I broadly speaking mean a certain reconstruction, maybe pick and choosy, maybe cherry picky reconstruction of what we can say about the Buddha based on the writings that have survived to our day. Again, of course, we should remember that Buddhism begins, as most of major religions, begins as oral tradition, only later gets written down, so there's always a question of authenticity. Should I get into this even? Well, okay, parenthetically note in one sentence. Of course, you see, when you talk about a person who claims to be a saint or a god, the question of authenticity is super important. But I think we can quite plausibly reconstruct some of the key texts of the earliest Buddhist sources, the Pali Canon, right, as saying that Buddha doesn't really have any special status, right? That in principle, anybody can become a Buddha. This, of course, becomes a hugely important element of later Mahayana tradition, right? But the reason I bring this up is that if we understand Buddha to just be another person, then what Buddha himself said is not that important. What is much more important are the arguments, right? And this would put Marx and Buddha on equal footing, right? Because they are not saints, they're not gods, they're not prophets from God or something like that, right? But they're just human beings operating, observing reality carefully, maybe even empirically, and then trying to draw some conclusions. And a certain, I think, also immediate unity and style of, I'll probably get back to the slide, but a certain unity of style between Marx and Buddha. Again, I want to say, so again, there's this notion of ideology, or the veil of Maya, right? That we observe reality around. We begin with a careful observation. Is this empiricism? Well, with a question mark. I think there are important empirical evidence. Also, doubts about empiricism. Doubts about the validity of empiricism precisely because human mind is unreliable. But we observe that human beings make mistakes. Also, both, I think, Marx and Buddha are going to point to a certain causal structure, which is over and above individual control. Over and above individual control. So in case of Marx, we're talking about this dynamics of mode of production, of mode, let's say the historical, if you want dialectical, I'm not going to write the word dialectical, historical dynamics of the development of modes of production. Again, this, what Marx calls materialism, right? And over and above individual control, also this question that I think that on the correct reading, neither Marx nor Buddha believe in free will, or at least there are ways in which they undermine our opinion about our free will. So human individual free will in question. So plus this is important. Free will in question, right? That human beings tell themselves stories about how they are free, but actually they're not, right? And Marx is going to say, well, what actually governs us, rules our lives, are these material forces which make us the people that we are, so to speak, behind our backs. And Buddhism, broadly speaking, talks about karma and the doctrine of dependent origination, right? All this kind of stuff. Which is a technical separate points to have our own video on them. But again, this notion that there's a certain causal structure, and people, for both Marx and Buddha, people find themselves in particular situations which they do not choose. We do not choose to be born where we are, right? We do not choose to be born upper class or lower class, let's say, the bourgeois, the proletariat for Marx, and our social situation makes us what we are. Likewise, for Buddha, we don't choose to be incarnated in this particular body in this particular instant. There's a past karma which defines our mental states right now. And I think that there's a broad analogy, broad unity of style. I don't want to say broad unity of style and purpose between Marx and Buddha, but I want to say that you can read them side by side as mutually reinforcing one another. So yeah, let me continue. So yeah, so this question of ideology, question of causal structure. There's also an understanding that this anti-teleological understanding, right? It's a very important point of contact between Marx and Buddha, that this world is not made for us. It is not naturally harmonious, right? So for Marx, the history, right? So for Marx, the history of humanity is history of progressive exploitation and dehumanization. And for Buddha, likewise, the three marks of existence: things are impermanent, things are unsatisfactory, and things are, they lack substance. They're doctrine of non-self. Should I maybe make a point, right? So I talked about incarnation in a particular body in a particular moment of time, right? So, like, strictly speaking, I think the proper way to reconstruct the core of the Buddhist doctrine is that the self does not exist, right? This is the famous doctrine of anatta or anatman, right? This point that, again, there is no such thing as a human soul, and the continuity from moment to moment is really a continuity of karma. So in this sense, yeah, when you talk about anti-teleology, maybe you even talk about some sort of physicalist understanding of consciousness. This is a very tall order. So let me do this carefully, like in many brackets. So physicalist account of consciousness. I'm not claiming that either Marx or Buddha actually has this, so like with 3 question marks, but I think that they can be made compatible with it. Anyway, so so this anti-teleology, kind of this understanding that life is suffering, right? For both Buddha and Marx, in many ways it is. And then the issue is that we can do something about it. We can do something about suffering, right? And for Marx, this is the notion of communism. For Buddha, this is the notion of nirvana, which is an individual goal, but also, of course, from the earliest times, you have the notion of sangha, which is a community of people who work together. So, I mean, you can see a certain basic analogy, I think, right? So we tend to misperceive reality. Life is bad. Well, bad is relatively. Life is less than satisfactory, partly maybe because human beings are driven by desires, right? So the path to salvation is slightly different, but still, in both Buddhism and Marxism emphasize a certain communal element. So I don't want to get awfully sidetracked about this. Of course, there's this huge deal in Buddhism between Mahayana and Theravada, and the role of other people and the role of compassion, and how this ideal of an arhat or an arahant, right? who is just aiming for their own personal nirvana. And then there's the idea, the Mahayana idea of the bodhisattva, a person who's supposed to take a vow to not escape into nirvana before all the creatures of the universe have been saved. How does this square with the notion that the soul does not exist? Interesting question, interesting question. I have my own favorite answer. I'm not sure I want to go into this right now, partly because this may be controversial, but still, right? Kind of noting that there's a point here, right? But still, I think that there's a certain broad compatibility between the Buddhist and the Marxist point of view, at least at the first sight. Definitely should do a point, another video on ideology. We'll talk about this in detail. Okay, but what about Marx versus Buddha? And I kind of want to phrase this in, if you want, dialectical terms, in a sense. I always prefer to not use technical jargon, especially which can be misunderstood. I usually prefer people not use the word dialectics because most people don't know what they mean by this word. So right here, as a joke, I said this, but what I mean is that there's a productive dialogue, that there's a certain back and forth, and there are certain criticisms and counter-criticisms which can lead, potentially, who knows, to a deeper understanding of both doctrines, which is, I guess, the main reason I am making this video, to imagine this kind of mutual cross-pollination, and not just cross-pollination, but mutual clarification of the ideas of both philosophers, right? So let me start somewhere. So I think on the Buddhist side, you could say communism is just pie in the sky. It's just pie in the sky, right? This notion that you have problems right now, but instead of solving these problems right now, you are aiming for this future ideal of communist society, and right now we are just forced to live in this horrible situation without being able to do much about this. Especially, if you think of Marx in structural terms, right? This idea that revolution will only happen if there are correct historical, material, economic conditions, namely through crisis of overproduction, through the tendency to the falling rate of profit, the rate of exploitation increases, the workers become poorer and poorer, poor become poorer, right? Rich grow richer. And so at some point, wages systematically fall below subsistence for Marx, and this forces the workers to unionize, especially across national borders, which is very important. International workers' movement cannot succeed as a national movement for obvious economic reasons, because workers in different countries can act as strike breakers, so to speak, for one another. So, anyway, right? And so, but until wages fall below subsistence, it's not clear how much you can actually do. You can write books, write pamphlets in order to help maybe this growing movement, this transition, as Marx would say, from consciousness class in itself to a self-consciousness class for itself, right? So you can try to help this process a little bit, maybe like oil the joints, so to speak, but you cannot jump start it, right? That's the whole point of idealism versus materialism, right? So, or I should say materialism versus idealism, that ideas don't change the world. You need to, there needs to be the right kind of historical condition, right, for Marx in order for this to happen. So communism is just pie in the sky, right? And Marx is gonna, and so what you should do instead is the idea that you should try to be happy. Happy is the right word, maybe is the wrong word. I mean, of course, that's one of the usual ways in which people talk about Buddhism, but happiness itself is kind of a problematic term. So instead, try to be mindful, right? Try to achieve nirvana. Try to follow the path right now, right? Try to let's just say focus on the now, and especially like the practice you can do today, like meditation, right? Which is not necessarily the paradigmatic. Well, it's kind of some people would tend to associate Buddhism with meditation. For them, the key Buddhist practice is meditation, and some forms of Buddhism are like that. Like if you think of the Sanskrit word dhyana, which turns into chan, China, and Zen or Zazen in Japan, yeah, meditation would be the most important practice. But there are many different forms of Buddhism, so who knows, right? So, but still, as an example, focus on the now practice you can do today. And Marx is going to say, well, okay, you sit down, you meditate, and what do you get? So, Stoicism, Christianity, in this case, Buddhism as well, right, are just opium, right? So this is something that, again, religion is not a cause of human unhappiness or of human bondage, but religion is a symptom, merely a symptom, right? It is a consequence. But still, it does play this role. It plays the role of opium, right? In the sense that it helps dull the pain, and it diminishes, at the end of the day, it diminishes the class conflict, so that it makes it harder for the revolution to come about, right? So instead, what you should do instead, we should, how should I say, like, focus on the negative. Don't forget about the negative. Like, intensify the class struggle. Intensify the class struggle, right? And yeah, these are, I mean, I'm trying to be polemical. Of course, you don't have to read this polemically. You could have a more sympathetic view of both communism, like communism and Buddhism in light of each other, especially some kind of notion of, again, Mahayana ideal, where you have the enlightened society. So let me maybe add this, like, except Mahayana enlightened society. What I mean is society at large, like everybody, the society at large, right? Everybody enlightened, right? So what I'm kind of driving at is that we could try to see beyond, right? So the productive. So what actually, like, this is the criticism, if you want, and let's try to turn this around for some positive ideas. So on the positive side, right, Marx can help the Buddhists maybe to clarify their teaching and focus, like, separate the wheat from the chaff, right? Wheat from the chaff. So the wheat of effective psychological practice. Let me write psychopractice, which, among other things, supposedly should help us see the world clearly, see the world clearer, right? Separate this from the chaff of ideological, again, like Buddhism as mere ideology. And this is something I am personally interested in as a person who is has spent a lot of time in my own head, right, thinking about Buddhism and Marxism. This is the I feel that there are clearly forms of Buddhism which are deeply ideological and counterproductive. Probably at the end of the day, even from the standpoint of core Buddhist doctrine itself. So there is room for productive internal immanent criticism, if you want, of Buddhism, sort of separating different forms, different strands, different interpretations, right? So if you think of, again, devotional Buddhism, like Amidaism, or if you think of tantric Buddhism, this is a kind of complicated set of issues, I think, to be untangled here, right? And on the other hand, I think that there's an important side, and I don't even want to ascribe this to Marx or to Buddha, but for both of them, I feel that the deeper, more correct reading of both Marx and Buddha is in anti-moral terms, right? That morality is just a construct. Morality is just a construct. And it's important to see reality clearly beyond the judgments, right? Beyond the moral judgments, which really tend to obscure things, and also, you know, it's kind of, I think there's a certain like a Nietzschean, you know, quasi-Nietzschean distrust of morality. Quasi-Nietzschean suspicion of morality. Let me add this. Quasi-Nietzschean suspicion of morality, right? And also, again, like actually Nietzsche criticizes Buddhists as nihilists, like the Christians, right? And so I think that this is also another important idea of how Nietzsche compare or versus, I don't know, Marx and Buddha. Is Marxism nihilism? Is Buddhism nihilism, right? And I want to say, in an important sense, my personal answer to this question is no, right? I prefer to read, you know, Nietzsche, Marx, and Buddha, read them together. Read Nietzsche, Marx, and Buddha together, right? Read them in a productive dialogue with one another. At the end of the day, Buddhism and Marxism, I feel, should be life-affirming, not life-denying. So Marxism and Buddhism is life-affirming, not life-denying. And this has to do with a problematic question of you know, morality and moral values, right? The like immanent criterion of morality, right? Which is basically this notion that you know, some kind of, you know, if you want, naturalistic morality, morality. And I've spoken about this in other classes, but of course after David Hume, after I think George Edward Moore, so let me maybe mention these names. So after Hume and Moore, we don't actually believe that morality can be natural, right? So this is a problem. But in the absence, of other criteria, we have to fall back. We have to fall back on immediate experience. We have to fall back on immediate experience. And so Hume Moore, in this case, versus John Stuart Mill, right? Because this is basically what Mill says in his Beginning of Utilitarianism, right? And you know, you can, if you want, you can compare this move to Sextus Empiricus. You know, another video there, dialogue between Epicurus, you know, let me add this, Epicurus, Sextus, Buddha, right? This is an IOU for me to make a video on that, on this dialogue. But anyway, the idea of this naturalism is that, you know, you don't need to explain why nirvana is good. So nirvana or communism are good, you know, for naturalistic immediate reasons, like okay, this is a complicated point, and I am running out of time, so this, and maybe there's like a whole separate discussion here, but it's like the criterion is immanent. The criterion is immanent. It immanently, you know, immanent in the sense that it is present to the mind. You don't establish it by further argument. Buddha says life is suffering, and the way to get rid of suffering is to get rid of desire, right? Like you are supposed to, I mean, supposedly you can try this in your own experience, and even like the first time people meditate, they feel a premonition of this, right? When you diminish desires, your mind becomes more calm, or more tranquil. You feel happier. You feel equanimity, right? And Marx immediately comes in and says, this is just opium, because, you know, nirvana is not communism, right? That's a problem. That's a problem. Nirvana is not communism, right? In the sense that for Marx, nirvana is opium. It's just opium. But it's harder to say with respect to the Buddha, and of course, again, there's Mahayana tradition which turns this on its head. But communism is supposed to be the, you know, this Aristotelian ideal of the development and expression, right? So excellent development and expression of our rich and varied abilities, right? Rich and varied abilities. So it's like, again, it's like trying to solve the problem of suffering by creating this society of abundance. Who knows? You know, it's like, it's like, but are people going to suffer in communism? Are people going to suffer in communism? And the answer is probably yes, from the Buddhist standpoint or from the Marxist standpoint. But it's like, at least you diminish unnecessary kinds of suffering, and maybe in a more enlightened society we can help ourselves and each other, right, attain enlightenment or calmness, tranquility, right, however you want to understand the word nirvana. So, but I want to emphasize that I think that there's a bit of a disconnect there, right, between one and the other. These are not the same ideals. But there's another important issue I was driving towards, and I should bring that up here, because Marx is supposed to be beyond morality. Again, and I mentioned this already. Supposed to be beyond morality. So in this sense, and again, let's think about this in terms of Marxism and Buddhism. Again, this notion that so let's keep the Buddha at the back of our head and the Buddhist criticism of morality, right? So capitalism is not bad, according to Marx himself. It's self-contradictory, right? Whatever that means, that's a separate video there. And likewise, communism is not good, right? It is simply like it simply casts away the capitalist fetters, capitalist superstructural fetters, the fetters of capitalist superstructure. Right, and I'm tempted to think about this in Nietzschean terms again. How this notion that it is the essence of the bird to fly. It's like communism is like the eagle in flight, right? So like communism is supposed to unchain, unfetter, right? Enable the free expression and development of our creative potential. So in this sense, it's like again, capitalism is not bad. It simply leads to its own destruction for Marx. And communism is not good. It is simply more in line with the potentialities of human nature, keeping in mind that, of course, for Marx, there is no such thing as a stable human nature. Human nature changes with history. Communism, captures that too. And I'm sure Marx believed that human nature will continue to change in unpredictable ways in communism, which is the free society, which is the first stage of human prehistory. Okay, so this has been going for quite a while. I'm not exactly sure what the conclusion is. Again, I promised at the beginning this is me a little bit thinking out loud. I feel that there's potentially some tension, also maybe some overlap. I guess these days I'm more interested in Marx, and I'm more interested in a dispassionate scientific reading of Marxism, and maybe Buddhism can help with that, right? So we should not hate capitalism. This just clouds our judgment. We should not be attached to communism. This simply clouds our judgment, right? But to have a certain structural reading of Marx. So let me take this as a intermediate conclusion, right? So a structural, so Buddha can help, right, with the structural reading of Marx beyond morality, beyond moralizing, right? And especially this notion that the communist revolution is not supposed to be the revenge of the poor against the rich, which is I believe is exactly right. Is not supposed to be the revenge, this resentful. Say hi to Nietzsche. Revenge of the poor versus the rich, right? On the one hand, and on the other hand, the bourgeois, on the other hand, are not bad people, right? But systematic problems require systematic solutions, right? When I say not bad, or if you want, not evil people, right? And again, this notion that we should understand and not blame, right? And definitely, this is a very important element in Buddhism, right? This is a very important element in Buddhism, this non-judgmental attitude, which seems to be absent from at least popular versions. So let me write popular versions of Christianity or other Abrahamic religions, right? Although, again, there are different ways to read this, different ways to think about this. So non-judgmentalism, and on the one hand, and non-judgmentalism and anti-teleology, right? Okay, colleagues, let me leave you with this for today. Let's keep thinking about this. I would appreciate your comments or questions on this. Hopefully, you know, in a future, at a future point, I'll be able to revisit this question and you know, tell you if I've made some progress. Okay. So thus far, I hope this was stimulating. So as always, colleagues, stay safe, take care, and I'll see you around.